This is a story about a man who was saved by a clay jar. However, as he finally got what he wanted, a tragic event happened to him. My director's name was Ken. The man had been making a name for himself as the one behind those exquisitely designed dentures and their excellent quality. There had been people from clinics coming to our company in order to make contracts with us. They wanted to buy the top quality dentures in this country. Everyone curiously asked Ken how he could make such white yet sophisticated dentures, but he simply said it was a secret that only insiders knew. I had been working at this company for over 3 years. My boss Ken always trusted me, because I was the only employee who focused on my work and wasn't curious about his private life or the way he ran his business. Recently I didn't understand why there were so many articles expressing negative views about our company. On social networks, strange stories about our dentures products were being spread. I quickly prepared all the statistics, then took a team of papers to my director's office to report on the complicated situation going on with our products. The door wasn't locked. As I was outside, I gazed into the room. Unexpectedly, I saw Ken lying on the floor in such confusing manner. In front of him was an odd-looking clay jar. He placed teeth inside the jar. I was confused why he was doing it. A few seconds later, my curiosity became even greater as the jar, without being affected by any force, suddenly vibrated. There was a strange expression on Mr. Ken's face as he looked at the lid of the jar and let out an evil smile. Then, from the jar appeared something that looked like a leg of an insect. It looked creepy. The bug became more and more visible before my eyes. Never in my life had I seen an insect that ugly and disgusting. It had 6 thorny legs. Not only that, there were many eyes on its back. Not just one, but 2, 3, and then dozens of them slowly crawled out of the jar. The more of them came out, the more delighted Ken seemed to become. But the odd thing was, after a few seconds crawling on the ground, those creepy crawlies started to drool. They trembled and then contracted. Their eyes somehow disappeared while their legs were slowly retracted. Finally, they ended up turning into a bright white tooth that looked extremely sophisticated. They were similar to the type of dentures that had been supplied to dental clinics by our company. Despite witnessing the whole thing, I couldn't believe my eyes what had just happened. How could those disgusting looking bugs turn into teeth? While I was still trying to figure out what was going on, Ken suddenly yelled. Seemed like he had found out that I was watching him. "What are you doing out there? Come inside!" I took a deep breath, tried to keep my composure, and came inside with the papers in my hands while pretending that I hadn't seen anything. But I guess my acting was too terrible. The director closed the door and started telling me a story that had happened to him 4 years ago. Back when the company was having difficulties doing business and burdened with debt, Ken had to hide out. But his life had changed since the day he met a strange man who brought him a spooky jar during a police getaway. The man placed a coin into the jar in front of him. Amazingly, the creepy bugs appeared and then finally transformed back to the form of coins. Out of curiosity, Ken slowly approached him. But the man wearing a black outfit quickly went away, leaving the clay jar behind. However, before leaving, the man didn't forget to tell Ken how to use the jar properly, and told him not to be too greedy as the consequences would be disastrous. Ken's greed arose as he looked at the magical object before his eyes. He started thinking about using the jar for his bad intentions, including opening a new company without spending a penny. Of course, he didn't even care about the mysterious man's warnings about the lifespan of these bugs. First, the director used the jar to pay off his debts. Then he opened a company which specialized in supplying dentures. As I was listening to the story of my director, I curiously asked him about the quality of the dentures. The director let out a smile and said that there hadn't been anything bad happening as the dentures still displayed desirable quality. But I somehow had a feeling that things were getting out of control, and it wasn't as simple as he might have thought. As if the director was able to read the thoughts on my mind, he confidently placed his hands on my shoulders as he believed I wouldn't tell his story to anyone. He even promised to give me a pay raise, started from next month. Immediately I told Mr. Ken that the dentures weren't as excellent as he thought they were. As I handed him the documents, I briefly reported on the ongoing situation with the company. The director glanced at the papers, and he immediately became furious. His eyes wide open, he frowned and held. "Who is it? Who slandered our company?" There had been accusations that the company's products had low quality, as the dentures strangely turned into creepy bugs after 1 year of use. Mr. Ken couldn't hold in his anger. He crumpled up the paper, clenched his teeth while claiming that someone had indeed tried to slander the reputation of his company. Mr. Ken then assigned me to handle this case. But the situation did get a lot worse than I thought, as people had come to the company calling for a boycott of our products. Meanwhile, I constantly held press conferences on reaffirming the top quality of our products in the hope of gaining back the company's reputation. Of course, the reporters and journalists who showed up at the conferences were bribed an amount of money to allow public concerns about our company. Their articles quickly reassured the public as the reputation of the company was quickly regained. The sales of our products became stable again as we finally won back our customers' trust. Not only that, many clinics from overseas also offered to work with us. In many ways, the scandal had helped us become even more famous and widely known. Our business started thriving. Even our rivals had to show their admiration to us. That day, as Mr. Ken had just come out of the conference room, a strange man rushed towards him and held, "You scammer bastard! One day you will pay the price." In the face of such unexpected and displeased situation, Mr. Ken still remained calm as he asked who the man was and if he was in need of any help. Little did he know that the man was holding a knife behind him. The man softened his voice. He said that he was a victim of those poor quality dentures being made and sold by Mr. Ken's company. The man took off his mask and showed his face to everyone's surprise. He widely opened his mouth. In the palate there wasn't a single tooth in sight. Instead, there were lots of multi-eyed bugs that looked similar to those I'd previously seen in the jar. Not only that, the bugs were wriggling in his palate, looking extremely disgusting. They were slowly eating his gums like monsters. After taking off his mask, the man became crazy. He rushed to Mr. Ken while calling him a con man. He swung his knife and held, "I don't want to live anymore, but before I die, I will take you to hell with me." Fortunately, the security guard showed up in time. They quickly overpowered the man. Having regained my composure, I called the police to report on the assault. Director Ken was stabbed in his wrist. As he wasn't able to recover, he carelessly fell off the stairs. The situation was beyond my control as I was just able to let out a scream and rush down to check. The director was lying on the floor. His face was strongly impacted. The fall seemed to be really bad. I woke up the director in panic, but he was unconscious, and on the floor there were some of his teeth falling out, with a little blood flowing out of his palate. I immediately called an ambulance to take him to the hospital. That day was definitely an unfortunate day for him, as he was assaulted by a strange man and then had to suffer a very nasty fall. The finest doctor at the hospital was called in to check on Mr. Ken's health. According to the doctor, Mr. Ken didn't suffer from any serious health problems. However, he had to have his teeth replanted as the impact of the fall was severe. It caused most of his teeth to be broken. The doctor had a private clinic. He was also a customer of our company. Before doing dental implants, he carefully measured the size of Mr. Ken's palate and chose the appropriate denture. Of course, the doctor would choose the brightest, also highest quality denture that he had purchased from our company for Mr. Ken. It looked like Mr. Ken had finally got the chance to use his own product. The doctor brought out the most expensive denture he had, one that he just bought from our company. He called to come over and gave it a check before he performed dental implants on Mr. Ken. I firmly believe that the director wouldn't want to wake up only to find out that he had lost most of his teeth, so every act was done quickly. The doctor put on his gloves. He quickly put his first tooth inside Mr. Ken's mouth. At that moment, Director Ken suddenly awoke. Seeing the doctor was implanting his teeth, the director reacted violently. He swung his arms and howled, "What are you doing? Get away from me! Do you want to kill me?" The tooth floated in mid-air and then slipped into Mr. Ken's mouth. Unfortunately, the director had accidentally swallowed it. Both the doctor and I couldn't understand why Mr. Ken had reacted so violently. The director even screamed for a while, then finally stopped. As Mr. Ken regained his composure, the doctor explained that he just wanted to re-implant the teeth for him, while I didn't dare to say anything. But the worrying and frightening expression still existed on Mr. Ken's face. It seemed like he was thinking of something. I walked up to him and gently asked if he was in need of anything, but he just coldly gazed at me and said that he wanted to be alone, then asked everyone to go outside until he called them. Having no other choice, I closed the door and went out. As I walked past the next room, I suddenly heard a familiar voice. Out of curiosity, I immediately gazed inside. Turned out that it was the voice of the man who assaulted the director a while ago. The dentist had removed all the creepy bugs off his palate, but the man looked extremely painful going through the process. The bugs looked very similar to those I had seen at the director's office. They also had 6 legs and the ferociously red eyes on their back. But it wasn't just a man present there. A police was also seen being with him to investigate. The doctor wasn't sure what type of bugs they were, but according to him they seemed to be very dangerous. If that man didn't make it to the hospital in time, those bugs would go into his stomach and carry parasites into his body. The man and the police were shocked to hear what the doctor said to them. They quickly asked the doctor to explain more about the harm these bugs could do to a person. According to the doctor, when the bugs entered the host's stomach, they would quickly damage the internal organs and death would be inevitable. Indeed, the bugs had eaten most of the man's gums, leaving large holes on them that looked truly creepy. My heart skipped a beat as I heard it. My body was streaming with sweat. If what the doctor said was true, Mr. Ken's life would be in danger, since he had accidentally swallowed a tooth. I quickly rushed to the director's room to tell him about what I had just found out. But the room was somehow so quiet. I knocked on the door multiple times, but it didn't answer. Having no choice left, I opened the door and went inside. Now as the director was closer to me, I called him again, but he didn't even bother to turn around. I took a deep breath, plucked up my courage to get closer. I put my hands on him and kept waking him up. But the director didn't react. I started trembling. A feeling of horror suddenly came to me. Right that moment, 2 multi-eyed bugs crawled out of his ear and fell on my hands, which startled me. The director slowly turned around. Seeing his face, I could no longer keep my composure. Half of his face was deformed, and from his eye sockets, his nose and the mouth, those creepy bugs were everywhere to be seen. They had carried parasites into his body. After the death of Mr. Ken, the company was sealed, and I had also lost my job. News were reported about the incident, saying the dentures contained toxic chemicals that caused the ones using them to have tooth decay and infection. This creepy story is about a guy named Xavier, a white-collar worker. Xavier was a talented and friendly person, so he easily gained the admiration of his colleagues and superiors, even though he always felt insecure about his baldness. One day, as Xavier was still working on his work report at the office, some of his colleagues approached him and asked him if he needed any help, but Xavier just merely responded that he was fine, so they didn't have to worry about him as he went back to work. As his colleagues understood his working personality, they greeted him friendly and left the office. Xavier was always jealous of everyone around him. He just wanted to naturally grow hair like everyone else. As it was almost midnight, he finished his work, turned off the computer, and quietly left the office to return home. As usual, it was late, and only Xavier was walking down the street. He quietly walked with great sadness in his heart. Being unable to grow hair on his head prevented Xavier from taking any chances to getting to know women. His life was filled with loneliness. Xavier had his condition checked at different hospitals, but the result was always the same. The doctors concluded he would never be able to grow hair. However, a miracle had happened. That night, as Xavier was on his way home, he suddenly stopped by a salon and gazed inside. It was a hair transplant salon. Despite having been on this street for multiple times, it was the first time he had seen this particular place. While Xavier was confused about its sudden existence, a man approached him and put his hand on his shoulder. It was a mysterious man wearing a black outfit. The most prominent feature on him was a large X sign printed on his shirt, which immediately caught Xavier's attention. He introduced himself as the owner of the salon and someone who could help Xavier regrow his hair, but Xavier didn't seem to believe what he said. "Why don't you just give it a try? You have nothing else to lose. Fate is in your hands, so why not come inside and change it?" Then the man left without saying anything. Xavier was really convinced by what the mysterious man had said to him. Xavier hesitated. He stood in front of the door for a while and then eventually decided to go inside and get a hair transplant. The next morning, as usual, when the alarm went off, Xavier immediately got up to get ready for work. His head felt extremely itchy, but Xavier didn't care much as he had forgotten about the hair transplant he had yesterday. Being in a rush not to check himself in the mirror, the man just kept going through his morning routine as usual. After applying the toothpaste on the toothbrush, Xavier finally looked at himself in the mirror and was stunned by what he saw. Hair was growing on his head. It was only after a night, but somehow his head was instantly covered with hair. But it wasn't much of a big deal to Xavier, as the only thing he cared about was the hair growing back. He satisfyingly touched the short strands of hair, as it had been years since feeling hair on his head, and never in his life had he been as delighted as he was at that moment. As hair was finally growing on his head, Xavier became much more confident, and he easily won the hearts of his female colleagues. The cheerfulness and excitement he had after the hair transplant helped him perform better at work, as he continuously succeeded in carrying out large projects while receiving the trust of his superiors. His romantic relationship was flourishing. As a result, Xavier was eventually able to confess his love to a female colleague whom he secretly had a crush on for the past 3 years. She agreed to be in a relationship with him, and the two had extremely happy days being lovers. They moved in together and even considered getting married. But unfortunately, those dreamlike beautiful days didn't last very long, as something terrible had occurred. As Xavier's hair never stopped growing, he had to go to a barber shop for a haircut. At first, Xavier was very eager to get his hair cut, as he carefully looked it up on the internet in order to find himself a fashionable hairstyle that suited him best. However, a dreadful thing had happened. Xavier screamed in pain while his hair was being cut. Assuming the barber had accidentally pulled his hair, Xavier was furious and howled, "Can you cut my hair in a more professional manner? I really don't want to feel pain like that again." The hairdresser didn't have any idea what had happened to Xavier, but still apologized to him, as he was thinking it was his fault to hurt Xavier. The barber had an uneasy feeling as he was going very slow and careful, yet somehow his client still reacted strangely. As the barber continued his work with his client, Xavier once again screamed out in pain. This time he even bursted out into tears, making it all seem very serious. Seeing the reaction of his other clients, the barber's face immediately turned pale, but luckily Xavier didn't howl at him this time. It seemed like Xavier had noticed something strange with his hair. He couldn't understand how a strand of hair being cut could cause such unbearable pain to him. The hairs on the floor wriggled all over the place, looking very creepy. And since that day, Xavier didn't dare to go to any barber shop to have his hair cut, and so darkness started to enter his life. The hair grew very fast as it quickly reached his shoulders. After a month, Now, being shy of his hair, Xavier didn't want to go out at all. As his lover told him to get his hair cut, Xavier came up with thousands of reasons not to do it, as he didn't dare to tell her the truth. However, his girlfriend recognized his bizarre behavior and had doubts about it, if he was hiding something from her or not. Moreover, Xavier was getting skinnier and weaker. His face slowly appeared emaciated. For that reason, his girlfriend cooked delicious dishes to help Xavier get healthier. Strangely, despite eating 3 times more food than he did before, his body was still skinny. His girlfriend was very worried about his condition. She repeatedly told him to go to the hospital and have his health checked, but he always refused to do it. Not only that, his hair was getting even worse. That night, as the girlfriend was in her sleep, she suddenly heard strange noises, together with a very stinky smell that awoke her. As soon as she opened her eyes, she was startled as her body trembled uncontrollably. Being unable to keep her composure, she screamed out loud. Xavier was immediately awakened by his girlfriend's scream, but he really couldn't understand why. The girlfriend pointed at him. She stammered. She pointed at his head in panic. Xavier reached out to his back as he realized there was something horrifying happening to him. All kinds of insects appeared on his head. There were cockroaches, flies, crickets, and even rats. It was unknown how his hair could catch them and grip them. Panicked, Xavier immediately rushed to the bathroom so he could remove them and also clean his hair. He couldn't understand how those insect and dead rats could end up being in his hair. Xavier always had a feeling that his hair was slowly turning into little snakes, and that is why they could move and eat other creatures, but he couldn't fathom it. Even his girlfriend was terrified of his hair. Since his hair grew longer, his performance at work was also getting worse. As a result, the outcome of his projects were terrible. Every time he went to work, he caught his colleagues gossiping about him. And what goes around comes around. That day, Xavier was unexpectedly called to his boss for a private meeting. Xavier had a bad hunch that something bad was going to happen to him. The one wearing a yellow shirt was one of his closest colleagues. The man was also confused about how Xavier had been doing so terribly at work. Indeed, Xavier's assumptions turned out to be true. The boss immediately expressed his disappointment towards Xavier, not only for his performance at work but also his dress code. Therefore, the boss decided to fire him. Xavier was angry to hear what the boss said to him. He indeed wanted to get rid of his itchy hair, but no one seemed to understand what he was going through. At that moment, Xavier knew that it would be pointless for him to keep explaining, so he went back to his office, cleared his desk, and returned home. It was his hair that brought him success, but also caused him to lose his job. Gradually, he had an aversion to his hair. He had tried going back to that hair transplant salon, but strangely, it had mysteriously disappeared. Since then, every day felt like hell to Xavier. He slowly became skinnier and weaker. Since he lost his job, he had to count on his girlfriend for everything. But his hair was getting more and more abnormal. That night, while the two were sleeping, something terrible had happened. The girlfriend suddenly felt as if there was something touching her skin. At first, she thought it was just an illusion or a nightmare, but the pain felt realistic. It turned out that her boyfriend's hair was starting to move and wrapped around her arms. The hair was like an iron blade cutting her skin. She could no longer sleep as the pain awoke her. As she saw the strands of hair wrapping around her arms, she could not hold back her fear. Xavier woke up in confusion. Looking at the bleeding cuts on his girlfriend's arms, Xavier panicked. He had no idea what had happened to her. "What's wrong with your arms? Let me see them, hurry up!" Regardless of Xavier's concern and worries, his girlfriend was in extreme fear as she told him to go away. Xavier was surprised, yet he still felt worried about her, as he knew it was something about his hair. No longer putting up with his creepy hair, the girlfriend immediately packed her things and left in the middle of the night. She was furious before leaving. She constantly expressed her disappointment to Xavier as he refused to cut off his hair. And of course, Xavier couldn't do anything to make her change her mind. Although he didn't want her to leave, he still had to deal with it. To Xavier, his girlfriend was like the last person that he could count on at that point. So from the moment she left him, his whole world had collapsed before his eyes. Xavier desperately fell onto the ground. First it was his job and now his beloved girlfriend. Being in the depths of despair, Xavier was furious. He pulled his hair repeatedly despite causing himself great pain. It seemed like the act of his girlfriend leaving him drove him crazy, as Xavier screamed and cursed for having to live with the situation. Suddenly, he got up and ran straight into the kitchen. Then he grabbed the sharpest knife. It seemed like the outrage in his heart had made Xavier forget all about the pain he had. He swore that if he had to die, he wouldn't care, as he needed to get rid of his hair. Xavier picked up the knife and placed it near his head. As he was not yet able to do anything, another terrible thing happened that made him panic. The hair suddenly turned into thousands of small snakes that moved and grabbed his arms. Not only that, they even took the knife away from him. Struggling to escape, the more intensively he tried to move, the tighter the snakes grabbed his arms. Somehow the hair suddenly grew abnormally fast. It wrapped around Xavier's entire body. The hair strands were like small knives cutting his skin painfully. Soon Xavier was completely tied up by his own hair. He tried to scream out loud, call for help, but no one seemed to hear him. And within few minutes, the hair devoured him. The only thing that could be found in his home was a giant mass of hair. Xavier was not the only one, but a lot of people also encountered similar cases. The hair transplant salon bizarrely reappeared on the streets at midnight. It also attracted many clients. Still, it was the same mysterious man in black with his fancy words. And those who came to the salon all ended up having the same outcome as Xavier. The strands of hair being transplanted were actually parasitic organisms which absorbed nutrients from the host's body, and once they became strong enough, they would swallow everything. This is a story about Tony, who was a bad student in class, despite having parents who were also teachers. However, growing up under their strict parenting style had made him quite a reserved boy. He even made friends with the gangsters in his school. But Tony was constantly pestered and lured to do bad things with him. Tony himself was sick and tired of bullying other students, so he had tried to avoid seeing them many times. While Tony was talking to his old friends, he suddenly saw a familiar figure in front of him and felt uneasy. His old friends also recognized the two people standing in front of him. It turned out that those two people were Tony's dad and Ken, his neighbor friend, who was his age. His father always comparing Tony to that boy. Seeing that, Tony's friends made fun of him, as their class teacher liked that boy Ken more than his very own son. Tony became angry as soon as he heard them. He shouted and told them to leave him alone. Tony walked away. Being angry, Tony also felt sorry for himself. And just like that, Tony headed home with a sorrow. At that moment, he heard a voice. "Hi kid, still upset about your dad? I've got this special present. I think it might be helpful to you." As Tony was angry, he didn't care much about how the man knew about his affair with his dad, as he annoyingly shouted to the man to go away and mind his own business. But the mysterious man, who was dressed in black with a large X sign on his chest, didn't get irritated by the boy's insolent attitude. The man pointed at his own shadow. It somehow looked strange, as it could move, but yet unable to reflect his figure. The mysterious man told Tony that it was a magical shadow. Anyone who possessed it would be able to become anyone he wanted to be. Also, become anyone that others wanted to be. Not letting the man finish his sentence, Tony angrily pushed away the man and left, telling him to stop with his crap story. As Tony walked away, he smirked and looked at his direction. Suddenly, from his legs, the shadow of the man moved and quickly rushed to Tony. And just like that, Tony brought the shadow with him as he went home without knowing anything about it. Even though it was the beginning of the spring, the sky was moody and dark, as it seemed to signal something terrible about to happen to Tony's family. Tony went home with a sad mood. He greeted his dad, but his dad didn't even bother to look at him as he fixed all his attention at the newspaper. He asked Tony why he didn't come to the tutor class today. It seemed like the tutors had told him about Tony's absence. He told Tony that he was embarrassed to have such a stupid and lazy son like Tony. Tony's face became darkened as he heard that. He tightened his lips, tried to hold in his emotions, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. He turned around and spoke loudly. "Can you stop comparing me with Ken? If you liked him that much, then just adopt him." Seeing Tony angry, the father no longer said anything to him. He bowed down, petted his dog, and spoke in an ironic manner. "I wish you could be obedient like you, Chow. One could be not smart, but at least know how to behave, right?" Hearing what his father said, Tony became furious. He went to his room, slammed the door, and locked himself in it. He took rest on his bed, but couldn't stop thinking about his pent-up frustration. Tony had been thinking about it for a while as he was repressed and feeling pity for himself. Now his dad didn't even like him as much as Chow, the dog in his family. As he was thinking, he slowly went to sleep. Seeing her son not coming out for lunchtime, his mother went to his room and called him. Despite calling him many times with no reply, the mother thought that maybe Tony was sleeping deeply. Then she opened the door and walked in to wake him up. Seeing Tony still on his bed, she approached him to wake him up. As she was trying to wake him up, she suddenly stopped. A frightening scene appeared in front of her that made her face change color. She let out a fierce scream that made her husband quickly went to see what was happening. The father was shocked and panicked as he witnessed the scene in front of him. The scene was horrifying as Tony had turned into a dog and his face looked similar to Chow. How awful it was. Tony's face had been replaced by that of the dog. Seeing his parents so scared, Tony quickly touched his face and was shocked and panicked. He remembered the mysterious man he encountered before. Was the bizarre story he told them about the shadow true? Tony quickly told everything to his parents, even what he knew about the magical shadow. It turned out that, like what his father had said before, as he wanted Tony to be well behaved like Chow, Tony had now carried the face of a bulldog. Tony quickly told his dad to reverse his wish. He immediately did that, and Tony's face slowly returned to normal. Seeing the transformation on her son, the mother gave a gasp of amazement as she was worried about him being so shocked by it all. However, the father started to have some freaky thoughts. It looked like the man wanted to use the power of that magical shadow to turn Tony into someone else. Indeed, he turned to his wife and said that he wanted to use the magic to turn Tony into someone better. The next morning, both his parents drove them to school. Never in his life had he seen them being so happy and caring about him that much. Thanks to the magic shadow, Tony always had many experiences that he never had before. Wherever he went, people were talking about him. Many female students admired Tony. The magical shadow had given him a handsome face, a tall muscular figure that made him look like a celebrity. At first, Tony was a little bit shy as people were staring at him, but he gradually found it amusing. Not just his appearance, his father also used the magic shadow to turn him into a person with an extremely high IQ. That day, as Tony was having math class, the teacher gave a math problem to the class and said that it was advanced and that only a few people can solve it. Indeed, the math problem was so difficult that even a brilliant student like Ken was unable to solve it. At that moment, Tony glanced at Ken as he wanted to make sure that he couldn't solve it, so he would volunteer to answer it. Then immediately, Tony stood up and gave the teacher the correct answer to the math problem. The whole class was amazed. Even the teacher had to come to Tony and compliment him on his significant improvement. However, as the teacher patted Tony on the head, he noticed there was something under the cap that the boy was wearing, so he took it off and told Tony not to wear a cap in class. However, as soon as the teacher took it off, he immediately panicked. His face changed color. The quiet class suddenly became noisy. Some students even screamed. Everyone was terrified to see the pimples on Tony's head. After school, Tony went home. Despite being a flawless person that many wanted to be, he didn't feel happy for it at all. However, his father still had no intention of stopping upgrading Tony. It turned out that his dad wanted to turn Tony into a human calculator that could store huge amounts of different information and become a living encyclopedia. Tony, not wanting to disappoint his parents, had to obediently do what his dad told him to. He plugged dozens of wires into Tony's head. It gradually became bigger and bigger, and it had absorbed too much data. Contrary to the look of his head, his face was haggard. His skin was pale, looking lifeless. However, the father still acted coldly. He told his son to try to put up with the pain, as it would be nothing the moment he became a successful person. Tony couldn't stop trembling. He wanted to stand up, yet his dad forced him to sit back down. He told him to sit there for another 30 minutes, then he could go back to his room. However, something bizarre happened. The magical shadow under Tony started moving and disappearing in the blink of an eye. Tony felt an incredible relief in his head as the shadow left his body. As the shadow left his body, Tony went back to normal as the pimples on his head had disappeared. But where did they go? Not even he could answer that question. At that moment, his parents were in their room, not knowing anything about the disappearance of the shadow. They were discussing on how to make Tony become the most intelligent person in the world, someone that could outperform calculators and machines. But Tony's dad had no idea that his actions and illogical requests had upset the shadow and made it furious. At that moment, the shadow of his parents started moving and deforming. Did the magical shadow had changed its target? Despite being back to his normal shape, Tony didn't feel happy, yet he was being worried. He secretly went to his parents' room. Somehow, Tony had a hunch that the spooky shadow would be at their place. At that time, Tony suddenly recalled what the mysterious man with the large X sign on the chest had told him. He said that the shadow would become out of control if one's greediness went too far. However, he still didn't believe much about the fact that the shadow would do too much harm to a person. So Tony went back to his bedroom and slept until the next morning. The next morning, during the meal, Tony told his parents about what the mysterious man had said to him. But his father did not pay attention to it. He said that he would continue to upgrade Tony to become a robot. At that moment, Tony could see the magical shadow behind his dad and mom. It looked like the reason why they made such unacceptable requests was due to them being controlled by the shadow. Just by looking at their eyes, Tony knew clearly that they were no longer his parents. He screamed in fear, then hurriedly got out of his chair and ran outside. His parents immediately stood up and chased after him, as they looked like lifeless bodies. The way they gazed at him looked just like they wanted to devour him. Tony rushed out to the house, yet he wasn't able to bring his cell phone and wallet with him. He kept running and running until he no longer saw the figure of his parents behind him. Then he stopped to take a breath. Having regained composure, Tony found out that his stomach was growling. He was starving. He hurriedly reached to his pocket but found neither his wallet nor his phone. Knowing it would be dangerous to go home at that moment, but he also realized that having no money might cause him to die on the street due to starvation. So he waited until it got dark, as his mom and dad would drop their guard, so he could sneak into home to get some necessities. As soon as Tony entered the house, he walked slowly to avoid making any noise. But Tony did not think much about it, as he quickly put his wallet and phone into his pocket. However, as Tony had not made his way out of the house, he heard the footsteps upstairs. His face immediately changed color. It became darkened and the boy was sweating with fear. As expected, the spooky shadow disguised itself in the form of his dad appeared in front of him. His father appeared to him, then coldly said something confusing. Even the voice was no longer his. Tony hurriedly fled from the house. At that moment, he was certain that his father was being controlled by the shadow. Having a home but no longer being able to stay or dare to come close to his parents, these once familiar things suddenly became too dangerous for a 16-year-old boy. As he had no idea where to go, he suddenly remembered that he had an aunt who lived in the suburbs of the city. Tony immediately took out his phone and called his aunt to ask for a few days' stay. According to the address given by his aunt, he took a taxi and after 1.5 minutes of moving, he finally arrived. Seeing Tony being panicked, the aunt couldn't help but be confused. She led the boy into the house and poured him a glass of hot water, as Tony told her all of the scary things that were going on at his home. But while he was telling his stories, outside there was someone knocking on the door. Feeling worried that it might be the shadow disguising as his father, Tony immediately told his aunt not to let him get in the house. Tony came to the curtains and hid behind them. The aunt, feeling extremely bewildered, came to open the door while having no idea what was going on and who to believe. She opened the door carefully as she saw the person standing in front of her. She was immediately surprised. What Tony had said was true. It was indeed his father. But the strange thing was, Tony's father didn't ask her anything about his son, yet still talked to her like nothing had happened. The spooky shadow started to move. It split in half and slowly came to the aunt. Suddenly the house echoed with growling sounds. The aunt somehow slowly lost her consciousness. Her eyes slowly became strange as it gradually turned red, looking so scary. Tony, standing in a corner of the room, started trembling as he witnessed what was happening in front of him. It looked like the shadows was using its magic to hypnotize and control everyone it encountered. Immediately the two rushed to Tony. At that moment, Tony was so scared that his whole body froze. The scene was so scary, both his father and his aunt, with their black eye sockets and mouths, rushed to Tony. Horrified, Tony let out a fierce scream. In a moment, Tony turned around and jumped out of the window despite knowing that he was on the 5th floor of the building. He jumped out all the way from the 5th floor, ignoring all the risks that he would have. Luckily, Tony landed on a garbage truck. That evening, as a worker was doing his job at a landfill, he suddenly heard someone sobbing. He hurriedly looked around to find where the cry was coming from, then eventually saw a boy lying between 2 garbage dumps crying. It was Tony. He was laying there feeling helpless and couldn't do anything but cry as everything had been too harsh for him. Seeing the landfill worker, the boy cried even louder as he realized all of his pent-up frustration. Feeling sympathetic for the younger boy, the man led him to his working place, wiped the dirt off his body and applied ointment to his skin wounds. He also gave the boy a portion of his small lunch. What a kind and gentle man he was. Seeing the food he was given, Tony devoured it like a tiger that was starving for days. As Tony had looked better, the man asked him, "Why are you here, kid? Don't you have a home?" As the man was asking him, Tony stopped eating and said that he couldn't go home now. The man, not knowing what had happened to Tony, advised him not to leave the home no matter how bad his parents could be, as the world was more dangerous than he thought. Tony, neither did he know what to say nor how to explain appropriately to the man, remained silent as he was afraid the man would think wrong of him. Having finished his lunch, the man went back to work. He didn't forget to tell Tony to take a rest before he wanted to leave to anywhere else. As he was using the saw to cut the small iron bars, the saw was worn out that it took him quite long to cut them. Not only that, the saw was broken after a short time. The man let out a sigh of disappointment. Tony saw it immediately, went outside and offered to fix the broken saw. But the man just smiled and told Tony that he wouldn't be able to do it since he was just a skinny young kid. But right after that, he panicked as he saw something strange happen before his eyes. It turned out that Tony's hand had turned into a chainsaw. It seemed like the spooky shadow was still in Tony, as it must have split itself up to infect multiple hosts. With the help of the new saw, the iron bars were easily cut in half, and the job was quickly done. The man, from being scared, slowly returned to normal. He friendly asked Tony how he had such magically special powers, and Tony didn't hesitate to tell everything to the man. Little did they know that his father was behind them, secretly watching from afar. It was until that he said something then the two of them panicked turned around. The shadow in the form of his dad told Tony to come home with him. Sensing something dangerous might happen, the worker quickly pulled Tony to stand behind him as he tried to stop the father. He looked determined as he insisted on not letting the shadow come close to Tony. Knowing it was no longer necessary to disguise as Tony's father, the shadow returned to its normal look and used it to magically hypnotize the man, just like how it did to Tony's aunt. The father gazed at the worker with his bloodshot eyes and then began the assimilation. The landfill worker suddenly got stopped. His eyes slowly changed. The father smirked. Soon enough, the shadow had successfully taken over the body of the man. Knowing clearly what would happen after that, Tony tried to scream loudly to wake up the worker. At this moment, Tony was terrified to find out the purpose of the men in black. They wanted to use the shadow to control everybody. Tony, feeling helplessly, watched everyone around him got owned by the shadow. However, he wondered to himself how could he escape the control that the shadow had on him. Or to be more precise, he was actually the one that controlled it and made it listen to him. Right at that moment, the father ordered the worker to attack Tony. Tony figured out that perhaps the man with that X sign realized that the shadow couldn't control Tony, so he had tried to do everything to get rid of him. Eventually, Tony decided to use the chainsaw that he had created before to fight against his enemies. Tony screamed louder to boost his courage. He'd already known that the ones in front of him had died and their bodies were being controlled now, and they were no longer the ones that he knew. Then one by one the enemies were taken down under his hand. Later, the disappearance of Tony's family had spread all over the news. 3 months later, at the time when many circus troupes started touring at one circus, there were many audiences excitedly coming to see the performers, including those of Ken and his girlfriend. On the stage, as a clown was performing, a shadow slowly came out of him and spread it out. The clown had extremely magical superpowers. He could even make flowers grow out upon his body. The girlfriend of Ken, seeing that, suddenly turned to Ken, telling him that she sensed something scary from the clown. As Ken stared at the clown, he also felt the same way. Suddenly, on the stage, the clown gazed at Ken. Then Ken's eyes immediately turned red, looking terrified.